All right, good morning and welcome geez, I already can't talk. PT on Ice Daily Show. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Megan Daly and I am coming to you from sunny Scottsdale, Arizona. I help out with multiple ice courses, so if you see me on the road, definitely come say hi. One of the ones that I help out with is clinical management of Fitness Athlete Live, and it is Fitness Athlete Friday. So right off the bat, I want to bring up that there are a couple courses coming up that do still have spots for Fitness Athlete Live. May 20th weekend, we have two different ones, Massachusetts and Maryland. I think both of them have spots open. June 10th is in Brooklyn. June 24th is in Loveland. I believe that's Colorado. And then I'm actually going to be at the one September 30th, Newark, California, which is right outside of San Francisco. So jump on those courses and join us for one of those. Also, a quick note, if anyone is going to be at the West semifinals next weekend, let me know. I'll tag myself as a collaborator. I'll be there. My fiance is competing, so I would love to meet up with some fellow ice people if anyone is going to be at the West semifinals. All right. So today we are going to be diving into the top 5 drills for fitness athletes with knee pain. Now, this is going to be when knee pain flares up, as well as if you have athletes that just want preventative measures. So, like, I think it's really common in this population to have someone who's like, oh, I have terrible knees, or I have a bad knee history, or I have old knee surgeries. What can I do to try to mitigate anything coming up? So, this is not only going to be my list of like some go-tos for when knee pain does flare up in this population, but also a really great way to give these athletes a couple things to do just as accessories in case they are worried about something popping up with knee pain down the road. Now, please note that this is not a complete list. Like anything, when you have like a top 5, it's not going to be all inclusive. It's just kind of the biggest bang for your buck for the most typical knee injuries, things, pathologies going on. So, and there's one that I'm not really going to include in my top 5, but if you've been to any ice course, you know that we're really big on spiking your heart rate as a way to get a giant like blood flow, get the heart pumping, and flush out anything that's in that area that's being inflamed and just icky and painful. So for the knee, that's going to be something like arms only bike, maybe ski erg if they can tolerate that's the range of motion of knee bend that's required to do the ski erg. But just know that you do want something in that vein. I'm just not including it in the list of 5 because it's not as direct, and that really is more of like an acute flare up versus a knee prevention. So a lot of times in this patient population, it's going to be, I think I typically see quad tendinopathy, patellar tendinopathy, patellofemoral pain syndrome. Like those are kind of the top ones. And then maybe you can throw in some like distal adductor tendinopathy showing up at the medial knee. There are some other things, but those kind of are like the big hitters. And it tends to be from an increase in squat volume or squat load. Maybe they jumped into a max squat and they missed the other days in the cycle leading up to it. Maybe this is what happened to me once. I was a CrossFitter that jumped into competitive Olympic weightlifting. And if you've ever done that, you know your squat volume like triples. Another one, we do have Murph coming up. If someone hasn't done the prep work for Murph and they all of a sudden jump into the running and the squat volume, we're not going to get into the shoulder stuff because that definitely happens with Murph too. But like, there's all these different things that can cause this spike. And so I want to go over some really great exercises to try to very quickly decrease knee pain. These are actually, I'll go into myself as an example during these as well, as how they've been like a real time allowed me to keep squatting and it wasn't like I had to modify anything. Okay, so like I said, definitely you're going to spike heart rate if it's an acute knee pain flare up. But then let's dive into things that are both for that knee pain flare up, but also can be given as like an accessory preventative for the person that's worried about knee pain. First is going to be Spanish squats. If you haven't tried these are brutal on your quads, but the beautiful thing about them is that they load your quads up hard without really requiring a ton of extra load. Like you can add a goblet hold to it, but it's not really necessary all the time. So if you haven't seen these, and I know some of you are maybe listening to this after the fact and not watching the video, and I'm not even demoing these, so it doesn't really matter. But a Spanish squat is going to be where you take one of those thick green pull-up bands and wrap it around the rig so you've got both ends on either side of the rig, and you can put your leg through the loops there. And then you're going to back up far enough away from the rig so you create a lot of tension, like that sucker's holding you at that point. And you are going to go into a squat, but it's going to look very different than your normal squat because you're going to be incredibly upright. That band is going to allow your shins to stay perpendicular to the ground, and you can sit far back enough that you actually get anterior translation of your tibia, and that unloads the knee. So this is particularly, I mean, it's hugely beneficial for quad tendinopathy, or patellar tendinopathy, really, because it unloads the patellar tendon, patellofemoral pain syndrome because it unloads the patella. Anyone who has osteoarthritis, it can unload the knee. Like, there's so many people that this is hugely beneficial for, and it really loads the quads. So it allows a giant blood pump at the knee by creating this like gap by unloading the knee. And then as you stand up, you're going to press your knees back into the band and create that. It's going to create a blood pump there, so it does flush out the system, and it loads the hell out of your quads. So it can drastically reduce knee pain very quickly. That I will say from a personal like case standpoint, not only did I jump into Olympic lifting all of a sudden, but I've also jumped into trail running very suddenly, and at one point spiked my volume so much that it did flare up some patellar tendinopathy. And all it took was a set of 10 Spanish squats, and I was able to do the squat program in CrossFit that day. Now, with all of these, take it with the grain of salt of the magic is when you can tweak it for the athlete in front of you. So the standard thing that I'm going to say for the Spanish squat, and if you've come to an ice course and heard us talk about isometrics and how they are so beneficial for drastically reducing pain very quickly, like more so than an ibuprofen, it's more effective than that. And that like rep scheme is 5 sets of 45 seconds with 2 minutes in between sets. So that is going to be like the standard. And then if anyone in here has done Spanish squats for 45 seconds, you know how brutal that is. It will help your knees so drastically. And note that, like, again, all of these are really great if someone is just like, hey, I just want something I can do once, maybe twice a week to prevent knee pain. I'm giving you the roadmap for what they can do. Second one, reverse Nordics. So real quick, before I go over reverse Nordics, note that typically with anything that's like really strength load based, the 5x5 at an 8 RPE with 2 minutes in between is like the standard. Like if I had one rep scheme to give you, that would be it. Now with that said, reverse Nordics really load the hell out of the quad tendon. So if this is someone who hasn't really like loaded the quad tendon a ton, like from a volume perspective, or if they are coming in because they overloaded the quad tendon too much, give that some wiggle room. So maybe day one with them, you don't quite do a 5x5. I typically do a 5x3 or a 3x5, but I cut the total volume down and then see how they do with that 24-hour pain pattern response first, so that I know. Because early on when I started doing this, and there's actually a friend of mine who is with ICE who did the 5x5, is like, oh, like I'll practice what I preach, let me do this, and gave herself quad tendinopathy because it was too much of a volume spike on the quad tendon because it's such a direct load. So I typically say cut down the volume a little bit, see how the 24-hour pain pattern does, and if they do great, then up it. Yeah, sure, fine. So if you haven't done a reverse Nordic, you're going to go in a tall kneel. You can pad the knees if you need to, and then you are going to keep the knees, hips, and shoulders all in a straight line, and you're going to slowly lower yourself back as far as you can. Full range of motion would be all the way to the ground and then all the way back up without breaking into hip flexion. This is incredibly tough. So a lot of times to start someone out, I'll throw a band around a rig or something that's really solid in front of them and have them hold on to that stretchy band, so it will actually unload them a little bit so they can go a little bit further back without as much strain on their quads, and then it will assist them in coming back up. And then gradually decrease the amount of tension in the band, and then eventually no band at all. All right, so we've got Spanish squats, reverse Nordics, and then the next three aren't as direct at the knee. Like those two, Spanish squats and reverse Nordics, are very much like, those are knee exercises. Now these next three are because they target important muscles that support the knee that are often involved. So we're going to look at hip flexors, adductors, and then glutes. So for the hip flexors, anyone who knows me knows I love a good psoas march. I think it's phenomenal. I give it to so many patients. I tend to go with kettlebell lowers for someone who's coming in with knee pain because it also hits the quads at the same time, so why not? If you haven't done a kettlebell lower, that is going to be, you want a pretty tall box or bench because you need something where the length of the person's shin plus whatever weight they're holding can clear the ground. So imagine if I have like the plyo box in CrossFit flipped to where it's 30 inches tall and I can lay across it. Now you're going to have someone sit on the absolute edge so that when they lean back, they have some kind of head support. And if you have a taller human, maybe you need to put two boxes together. I'm a grand total of 5'2", so I can get away with just the one box. And then you're going to strap a kettlebell on their foot. You want this like 10 to 15 pounds, maybe 18 pounds is generally going to be plenty for most people. Maybe my competitive athletes, I'm going up to a 24, but as a general rule, lighter. And then Zach Long, in our fitness athlete, came up with this really great hack for taking, you can kind of see me like mimic it on the video, is taking one of those hip bands and wrapping it around a dumbbell handle so that you create a loop at the top to slide someone's toes through. So you need something that can hook onto your toes and have a weight underneath the foot. And then the person's going to keep their foot dorsiflex so that the weight doesn't fall off. Lay all the way back, hug the opposite knee to the chest, and then that other leg is going to start up in full hip flexion and then slowly lower down, keeping the back nice and flat as far as they can go. Like the back really will be the limiting factor. Ideally, you want it to get all the way to like where it's no longer a positive Thomas test, really. Like you're basically doing the Thomas test with a weight on their foot. That's what it is. And again, it needs to be up tall enough that the weight doesn't hit the ground before they hit their in range of motion. And this is an eccentric, so they're going really, really slow. People love this. This feels so good. It is so beneficial for strengthening and lengthening the hip flexors. Like anyone that talks about like tight hip flexors, this is my go-to for them. But anyways, it also helps so tremendously for knee pain because a lot of times I see what's happening is someone is overutilizing their quads and their hip flexor isn't strong enough to keep up. And so their quads then get overworked. So it's something to strengthen and lengthen the hip flexor. And then I like those because it also, like you get some quad lengthening in there as well. So love that one. And then Copenhagen's. I think as a general rule, like anyone here who played soccer probably knows how much Copenhagen's were beneficial for avoiding knee pain on the field. Same is true for our fitness athletes now. Our adductors are so prominent in the squat. If you've come to the fitness athlete course, I just lost my light, whatever. If you've come to the fitness athlete course, then you know that we talk about how much the adductors are important for coming out of the bottom of the hole in a squat. Like it is the predominant muscle. So, and you can see this get overworked and show up as distal adductor tendinopathy with that medial knee pain. So strengthening the adductors can be incredibly helpful for avoiding knee pain, avoiding the knee having to get overloaded because the adductors aren't helping as much as maybe they should. Start with the knee supported. You can easily Google Copenhagen's. They are brutal, but they are so effective. Start with the knee supported, so that shorter lever arm, and then gradually work yourself out to a longer lever arm. Ideally, you end up with it, like the full range of motion would be foot on the top of the bench, and then you can even progress it past that with doing some hip flexor stuff on the bottom leg. Like if you want some progressions past the full one, shoot me a DM. I'll shoot you some videos of some ideas. And then that's again one of those 5 by 45 seconds. So going back to that isometric ideal, that's kind of what we want to go with there. And then the last one is for the glutes. Now, if you've come to the extremity course, you know that we talk about step-ups as being really beneficial and like the number one thing to get glute activation. However, because we are talking about someone who might have an acute knee pain flare-up, that's not what I'm going to go with for this particular population. They're going to get heavy as hell hip thrusters because I can keep the knee in a really stable, like no more than 90-degree, like bend. Their knees aren't going to be translating anteriorly, is how I meant to say that in this particular exercise. So set them up with heavy hip thrusters. Again, it's not step-ups due to the patient population that has acute knee pain. If you're going for more of the preventative knee pain, then yeah, sure. Like maybe step-ups might be a little bit easier for them to set up, throw into their normal routine. Overall, though, I think having heavy hip thrusters in your normal workout routine is incredibly beneficial, and most CrossFit gyms don't set aside the time for that. So that's why I really like heavy hip thrusters. And this is going to be a 5x5 at an 8 RPE with 2 minutes in between. You could double it up. Like I love putting a couple of these exercises together to create a program. And those, again, really heavy. So 8 RPE, if you're not familiar with what that is, a lot of times people like to think of it as like reps in reserve. So think of it like on a 10 scale. An 8 RPE means you have 2 reps left in the tank every single round. So at a 5x5, they can do 5 reps at that, but they really couldn't do much past 7. They would start failing. They wouldn't hit that full hip extension that we want. So that's kind of the weight that you want people at. So it should be really heavy, probably heavier than they think if they're not someone who does these regularly. All right. So again, it's Spanish squats, reverse Nordics, kettlebell lowers, Copenhagen's, and heavy as hell hip thrusters. Those are my go-tos for a fitness athlete with a knee pain flare-up. Again, that's not all inclusive. Like I didn't bring up a wall sit, which is another great isometric, but it's because a lot of times, unless they're unable to handle a Spanish squat, that tends to be the go-to for me so that I can really load up the quads a little bit more aggressively than the wall sit allows. But know that there are some variations, there are progressions and regressions of all of these. And then what makes a great PT is the person who can take this list and then tweak it for the person in front of them. So that's all I have for you today. Also, real quick, shoot a comment below on Instagram, because that's what I'll check more likely, and that's where I'll tag my own account. One thing that I almost came on and talked about today that I would love to know if you guys want to hear about is exercises for osteochondritis dissecans of the knees, because it's not very like well known. There's really terrible research on it. The protocols are not great, but I don't know how many of you are actually seeing that patient population and whether or not that would be valuable for you. So let me know in the comments below. Also, feel free to drop any questions about this episode. Hope it was helpful.